Hello, this is Scott, and I wanted to demonstrate some KeyShot rendering vagaries that cause models sent over from ZBrush using the ZBrush to KeyShot bridge to look rather dull and flat initially, which makes it very difficult to adjust the lighting. I will try not to make all this too tedious and boring, but by recognizing and correcting a few issues, our renders will look a whole lot better because the lighting will react to the model's surface in a much more predictable manner. Now there's a few problems to solve, and I'll be walking through each of them step by step, and I'll also be doing a demonstration with two different types of models, so you can really see what's going on. Anyway, the first model is Mr. Tennyson here, and really this is a 3D scan that I got for free on the internet at 3dscans.com. I'll post the link below. And anyway, he's just simply imported into ZBrush, and I've assigned like an off-white as the color. There are the values there, and just keeping it simple. I need to make sure that the renderer, the external renderer, is set to KeyShot, and then for this initial send I want to make sure that perspective is turned off. So I'll just hit VPR, and this will launch KeyShot, which I have KeyShot 7, and there's Mr. Tennyson now in the view. The first problem is apparent right away. He's facing the wrong way, and typically what I see folks do is just spin around the model so now that it's facing front, and we'll just position him here like as if we were rendering. And we can already see that it's a bit dull looking, and if we try, say, another lighting scenario, it's even worse. It's even more dull looking. And the reason is, if I go to the Environment tab, so the way I read this lighting scenario here, it's the main light would be in the middle, and these are two fill lights to the left and right sides, for the model. But if I zoom out so we can see the light dome, we can actually see that the lights are from behind. Because the model's facing backwards, all of our preset HDRs here will be backwards towards our model, so we'll never get the way these setups were intended. And these are of course made by professionals, so we're kind of wasting that opportunity by not turning the model. So there's two ways we can do this. We can actually go to the Environment tab and go to Rotation and spin it right here as 180. Now that gives us the light properly. So he's now lit from the front, and then the two fill lights are working as intended. But we are still backwards in the world. I'll zoom in here in Geometry View. If you want to show Geometry View, it's just Window, Geometry View there. You can still see he's backwards. See, the Z is facing forwards. This is like the global orientation for KeyShot. And where this you lose this ability right here. If I go to Standard Views and say Front, I don't get the front, I get the back, and so therefore left and right is just going to be off, and you really can't take advantage of that. And then you don't have to remember to turn every environment. If I switch, let's say, back to the startup, which is the default, it still keeps the 180, but for me, I like to spin around the model so that I can take advantages of the other tools in KeyShot. So anyway, so with ZBrush 2019, they have now the universal camera. So let's see how that works. I'll just do a new scene here. Just discard all this, blank slate, swap back to ZBrush, and let's activate perspective, which, as you can see, now we have a real camera going, and I'm using a focal distance of 85. The reason I'm choosing 85, in photography. If you're going to do portraits, usually a lens choice between 70mm and 100mm works really well. So 85 works well for me. So I'll just position this light a little bit, zoom in, maybe there, and we'll say this is good. So with perspective enabled, and then we send it with BPR, first thing you notice is it'll make KeyShot's application window jump out of my view that I have set up for my screen recorder. So let me just tweak that back in. There we go. But now we have what looks like everything facing the correct direction, but it's really not. Going back to the geometry view, we can still see that the world is forward here. We're still backwards, so which means all of our HDR presets are still backwards. And if I go to the camera, make sure I'm on free camera, and then choose standard view front, this is not going to work. This is not going to help me. In other words, I'm using these views a lot when I need to position items where I can quickly hit these orthographic views to kind of navigate around inside KeyShot. But that's up to you. But anyway, what I need to do in my workflow is spin around the model, and then I have to separately spin around the camera if I want to keep it. So to do that, I'll just stay on the free camera and zoom out. Go back to my scene, select this ZBrush container. This has like all the elements, all the subtools that came in from ZBrush will be inside here, so you can just select this globally as ZBrush and click position, turn on the move tool, and now I can start to spin Mr. Tennyson around the right way. Once I get so far, I can just type in 0 and be sure and click this green check. And now if I go to my camera and standard views in front, I get what I expect. However, my ZBrush camera, still no good. It needs to be moved around, and the way you do that is with the azimuth setting. Now it's a little bit tricky getting this around. What works is you actually need a calculator. So we can take this value, and I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to come over here to my calculator, drag it in here so we can see it, and paste in that value, and then we need to add -180 equals. So that gives us this value. Copy that, and I can, oops, we want to stay in spherical, and paste this back in. Now we have our camera angle the same way we set it up in ZBrush. I think where it feels a little far away for this, we could use a little more real estate here, so let's just zoom in a bit, and from there I will save this camera. So now we have this view updated, and this is what we'll work with. So our lighting is now proper. I'll go to the free camera and just zoom out so we can see the dome again. My main light is hitting Mr. Tennyson in his face, is what we want, and we've got the rim light happening back here, the hair light, whatever, and I can quickly return to the view. But notice that we really don't see any reaction much to this lighting. There, you definitely can't see any rim light happening, and the hair light has very little reaction to the model as well. And this is where the first issues start. So the first thing to look at from here is the material that's used. So if I switch to the material tab, double click, I have the properties for the default material as it comes in from ZBrush. It's kept my vertex paint, which is great, but even though this is the advanced material, it comes in with the specular as black, which I don't know why. That seems counter to what we all know as natural lighting. Specular highlights are very bright. So come in here, and I'll usually change it to a very light gray. Anything less than white, this works. I'll just choose this one for now. You know, I'm not trying to create the perfect render here. I'm just trying to, you know, demonstrate these how to set up this surface so it reacts to the lighting properly. So right away we can see now with specular highlights we're getting this hair light reflection on our model, and we're starting maybe a little bit of this rim light, but not really. I think it's more of just the more reflection of that the sky dome light happening here. But this is an improvement, definitely improvement. And the other thing we can do to improve is go to our the lighting tab, and KeyShot defaults to basic, which I guess is for speed reasons. I have, let's see, Explorer. Anyway, I have here where it has the intent for the basic, which is simple direct lighting with shadows for basic scenes and fast performance. And it's useful even though the models are illuminated by the environment, which I guess works. But what's interesting to me on that is global illumination is not checked. And global illumination is really KeyShot's superpower. That's what really makes the renders out of KeyShot shine, really pop, and feel very well lit. This is not bad, but it has sort of a satiny sheen to it, and it feels, you know, the lighting still feels artificial, at least to me. We could maybe cure this a little bit, like while we're in our environment tab, and we can just, you know, come up with some sort of background color here. Let's just go for a very, very dark blue, maybe something that complements that off-white. We'll just choose that. Help us see our model a little bit better. And it's still strange to me that this is, you know, what we default with. It's quick, good for setting up a scene, I guess, but it's not anything you really want to, you know, render out and share. What I find is when we're just using HDR lighting, interior lighting does a really nice job. So I'll switch to this preset. That enables global illumination, lots of bounces, lots of ray bounces, and already, you know, it's taken on a little bit more life. It's starting to feel a little bit better, but it still has a dull sort of artificial look to that. And that's going to be resolved once again going back to the material. So we've corrected the specular. The other thing we need to look at now is in textures. So the vertex paint, polypaint, comes through as a diffuse texture. If I uncheck, you'll see that it goes to white. So I'll turn that back on, get our texture, and before I make this next change, I'm going to let this cook just a bit. Cook meaning render. The way KeyShot works is it updates the entire image as it renders and continually refines it, and the refining goes a long way to removing the noise in the image and any banding with lights, which you'll see definitely in the other example that we'll look at. But let's see, we'll let this cook here another few seconds, and then I'm just going to save a screenshot so we have something to compare it to before this next change. And now what I want to do is look at this button right here, upgrade to new node. So this is actually tied to this texture map legacy here. Watch what happens when I click upgrade to new node. Two things are going to happen. You'll see the model change in the viewport, and you'll see this change as well. So the model gets a little bit brighter, and now the texture is called matte cap and the mode is called vertex color, this is what we want. And then watch what happens when I uncheck apply matte cap. The model really brightens up. So now this is getting really close to what I feel like is a good baseline. I feel like now this model is reacting to the light as expected. You'll notice if I turn apply matte cap back on, though, that we've lost this extra detail inside the folds of the cloth, or the detail of his beard, or especially his eyes. They seem to get lost when I uncheck apply matte cap. But unfortunately, this with the detail comes with some more baggage. It's causing the light on the model just not to react properly. And once again, I'll give you another demonstration that helps show why that is. But now we need to get this detail back. Now we can do that very simply. We just go to this material graph, click this button, and it brings up this node editor. And this is not going to be too complicated. All we're going to do is go to nodes, go to textures, and we're going to grab the occlusion texture. And what we want to do is just rewire this. So we'll take this and go to unoccluded, and its output will now go to the diffuse. And now this puts the detail back. You can see his eyes coming back, the beard, the folds. It feels a little bit heavy-handed, so typically I take it down just a bit. So we'll double click this, and now we can edit some of the parameters. I'm just going to take this down to 0.1 for now, and that'll be just a little less shadowy coming around. It's still, but now we have the detail back, and close that up. So now I'll let this cook for a minute. So basically, just to recap, we've brought in our model, we've spun it around 180 degrees so it faces the front. We've changed our lighting from basic to interior, so we can take advantage of KeyShot's global illumination, which, for using this style of rendering, KeyShot is extremely fast compared to other renders, at least I've had experience with. And then finally, the important step is getting rid of this matte cap material that kind of comes in as extra baggage in my mind, from ZBrush. I've left this a bit specular right now, like it's a shiny material, and I think to be fairer to the before and after comparison, let's go back to properties and let's just add some roughness. Like, let's say this statue is more of a concrete material. I'm not going to get into materials right now. Of course, that's where any model really comes to life, is with good materials. But right now we're just preparing a surface so it's ready to react to the lighting, so the materials that you put on later will react predictably. And as this comes in, you'll notice that now we are getting this rim light happening a bit, and that's what we want. And we've calmed down the specularity, but we still have a lot of good life happening in this model. It'll take a minute or so to render. I'll probably just pause the video and come back when we've hit about the 3-minute mark. That should clean up pretty well based on these settings at this size. So I'll see you in a couple of minutes. Okay, we're back. It's been about 3 minutes. The model's cleaned up pretty well. So let's just save out a screenshot, and I will pause this, and let's just take a quick peek at a before and after here. Let's see, here we go. Let's just open with photos. So here's where we started. This is when it just comes in default. We've changed the specular though, that's been done. And then here's where we end up. Much smoother, much more, I would think, believable, less artificial looking overall. From here, satiny sort of strangeness happening to here. Alright, there you go. So now, let's go for our other model. I will, let's just reset this scene. We'll start all over. Back to scratch. Back to ZBrush. And I have this model here. Okay, so this is called, well, it's my take on what's called a Cornell box, which is more or less a torture test for a global illumination renderer. I'm trying to light the inside of a space, but this is going to tell us a lot about what's happening more with those materials that come in from ZBrush. So anyway, it's just a box with a floor, and then if I turn off the room, you can see I've got these two garishly colored columns inside, and the reason for that will become evident here in a second. So I'll send this over without perspective. Okay, back in KeyShot. Naturally, we need to spin it around. So here you can see I've got several sub-tools. So if I just select the container here, choose the move tool, we can turn everything at the same time. Change that to 0. Green checkbox. And of course now if I do the standard views front, we're facing front. So the next thing to do is to get our camera inside this room. It's a little tricky, especially when it's in this mode. It's good to go to performance mode because that will sort of allow us to see inside here. Without it, it's just so dark. So with the performance mode enabled, I can sort of see how to get my camera position. The other thing too is I'm going to get a wide angle lens happening here so we can see more of the room. So let's just position somewhere like we're in this back corner here. We can see through the window, we can see both of our columns, and we can see our room. So go out of performance mode, and so this is what we get with the default lighting. It's not really fair in basic mode yet, so let's go to lighting and turn on interior, and you can see that it's still extremely dark. Before I forget, I want to save off a camera so we don't lose it. Going back to the free camera, if I zoom out again, we can see that we've got the main light sort of heading towards our window here, but it's tough for KeyShot to find it with just using this default setup. But just keep things simple. We're going to stick with it. What I am going to do though is brighten it up quite a bit. So in the environment, I'm going to set it to 12, and that'll give it a little bit better chance to render out. So let's give this is going to be a lot slower of a renderer. Like I said, this is a bit of a torture test for the renderer to find the light, bring it inside, and bounce it all around the room and resolve how the room is supposed to look. So this noise all around, this banding, this modeling needs quite a bit of time to clean up. In my initial tests before making this video, I let it render about an hour once everything was set up to get it something looking reasonably clean. So we won't go that far, but because what I need to show you will become evident much quicker than that. So just know that this is not going to clean up as far as the banding and the noise unless there's quite a bit of time. But let's start here. It's been about a minute. I'll do a screen grab for our starting point, and then we're just going to go through and keep going through the same steps. We've already rotated the model. We've changed our lighting preset to interior, which means we have our global illumination now working. So what's left is to grab these materials. Now I'm going to do these for this demonstration. I'm going to do these materials one by one so you can really recognize how these changes affect this particular scene. Let's just start with the green column. Double click it. I'm in the green. Same thing as we had on the Tennyson bust. We need some specular. We'll add that in. And I'll go ahead and make this more of a matte as we do this too. Not even go shiny. Over to textures, we need to upgrade to the new node. Now immediately you'll notice that this color from the green is now evident on the walls and floor. Now this is very important because this is the way natural light reacts. When light hits an object in the real world and then reflects off that object, you know, to our eyes, that's how we see the color. Well, it also carries with it that color onto other surfaces. So we have these white walls of this box, so the light comes in, hits this green column, and then reflects that color back onto the walls. Now this is not happening with the new node, with the legacy node. We have to update to the new node for light to react this way. So we were really cheating ourselves in setting up our lights, because that's why it's unrealistic. This is why our models come in from ZBrush default looking very artificial. And then I want to also go ahead and uncheck the matte cap. And all this does, it'll have a more profound effect as I keep moving. It's a little more subtle here, but what it did do is it allows even more of this reaction to come over. Now it looks a little too green at this point, but once all the settings are in place, it'll blend right on in. You'll see what I mean. So I'll keep going with the red column. We want to fix the specular. We want to add some roughness. We want to make it not quite as shiny. And then go to the textures, upgrade to the new node, so we have matte cap vertex color, and then check the matte cap. Again, now we got the red bouncing around and affecting the scene now. We still have problems though. Look how dark this ceiling is. You know, the floor is getting some light, but nothing is bouncing up and reacting to the ceiling yet. Let's go grab the floor, speaking of. Change the specular. Change the roughness and the refractive index. It's just the refractive index governs how shiny an object is. Go to textures, upgrade to new node, and uncheck apply matte cap. Now you saw the color sort of blast on there for just a split second, and that's just it's now receiving this light as it's refining. You can see these bands coming in different now. So this is just helping our surfaces now really start working with the light. Now this will be the most profound change, and that's why I saved it to last. So specular, and this is the box itself, the room itself. We'll change the specular. Go ahead, change the roughness, change the shininess, and over to textures. Now here we go, upgrade to new node. Not much happened yet, but now what? I mean, keep an eye on the ceiling, especially when I uncheck apply matte cap. Now look. Holy cow, right? So now this reminds you of like being at home and the sun shining through your window and lights bouncing all around the room and feeling well lit. All right, we're still using the default lighting. I've brightened it up just because, you know, without getting to a lot of technical issues, it's just hard for the renderer to find the light, the main light in the, you know, at the default setup, just, you know, having to look backwards through that window. But at any rate, you can see readily that just with ZBrush's to a KeyShot export, the default materials that come in with it are just really hindering how the light will behave. And again, you know, awful banding, awful modeling as far as this along the floor here, and then a lot of noise is not doing us any favors. And of course I could go in and put in the occlusion as well, and that would bring out our corners and connect these columns to the floor a bit better. But even without that, we're just going to let this, I'm going to let this render maybe about 10 minutes. I'll pause the video and come back. So here we are about the 10-minute mark. I'm letting this cook, and it's cleaned up quite a bit. Still lots of noise, but the banding has calmed down a lot. The modeling is all but gone. But we can still see some nice things happening with the light bleeding on to the walls, to the floor, to the ceiling. Good stuff. I'll take a screenshot, pause, and let's just go to and take a before and after of this. Open with. So here's where we started. We did update to the interior lighting. Everything's spun around, but we haven't updated any of the surface materials. And then making those changes, voila, so much brighter, so much more realistic. This feels like, even though I have two garish columns in my room, it feels like I have a realistic space happening here. And this, of course, feels very computery. So, well, there you have it. You can see how much better our lighting is going to behave. So as you know, you want to set up your lighting, this is going to take away a lot of trial and error because the surface is reacting properly. So even though this is not a final render, it doesn't have the proper materials, you know, that's what needs to be added. You know, some care needs to be taken for more intentional lighting. Of course, the placement of the camera, so it's thoughtfully composed. But this resolves so many of the vagaries that we get inside KeyShot. And it's good to do this type of exploration with any renderer you might use besides KeyShot. Just finding, you know, how global illumination works, how surfaces react to the light. That'll make going forward a lot easier. So basically, now that we have this sorted, I think I would like to share some thoughts on, you know, setting up lighting. You know, mimic how light behaves in the natural world, and then sort of think like it, you know, as if we're studio photographers, how we would, you know, use that light, and do this in a future video. So just stay tuned.